Well, welcome to the Soul Sovereignty Podcast with myself, Jessica Falcon, International Soul Embodiment Guide and Relationship Coach. And I have a guest expert here with me today, Jennifer Spor. She's a multidimensional healer and spiritual mentor for spiritual entrepreneurs, visionary leaders. And we're going to have a conversation around how to navigate the world using your discernment from a place of discernment, like what that even means, what discernment means, and particularly how to discern your own soul's truth. When there's so much information, there's so much happening, there can be a lot of seeming chaos, conflict, distress. It's easy for the mind, in particular, to get really wrapped up into what's happening. And I believe, Jennifer, you're also going to talk about this. It is so necessary that those of us who are conscious and aware and in tune with our soul and desire to create a new world, that we not get wrapped up in that we hold a knowing of a deeper truth that exists beyond the illusion of what's happening in the physical world. And that's something that we can only access inside of ourselves and radiate and vibrate out and take action from that inner place and that inner knowing. And so I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you because we share similar paths of helping people discover their own soul truth and embody deeper levels of their own divinity. And so there aren't many people who also have a multidimensional approach to sovereignty and a multidimensional approach to healing. So I know that we can dive deep in this conversation, and I'd love to start it with, what is discernment? Like, let's just talk about, what does discernment actually mean? And in that conversation, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, feel free.
Yeah. So we do share similar paths, and um, for me, I would say I've been consciously focused on my journey. We'll just call it that, right? We can call it lots of different things. For the past 15 years or so, and I've dedicated my life to this work full time for the last 10 or so years. And so my mission work, as far as supporting other people in stepping into the truth of who they are and what they're meant to do here, has never really changed. The core of that's never really changed, but I've traveled through different evolutions and cycles of that, right? Which I'm sure you can relate with, Jessica, and a lot of the people that are probably listening. And so I'm sharing all of this to say that my I'm actually moving into a new era of my mission work now, where I am focused primarily on supporting people in oversoul embodiment. And so, what is oversoul embodiment, right? What's the difference between your soul and your oversoul? So, your oversoul is essentially your primordial being, right? So, we talk a lot about soul led and living soul led and following your intuition and all of that. And what the context of that really is when we talk about that is in relation to the fragment of your soul, of your being that you're living in this current incarnation, right? You have divine assignments, mission work that you're meant to do. Your oversoul is the whole, all encompassing being of who you are as an eternal being. So, all of your incarnations, all of your experiences connected, that is your oversoul. And the reason why I am called to this work and I choose to focus on that as the next, as well, I mean, I'm already doing it, the next era of my mission work, is because a lot of the people that I work with, and I also live this on my own journey, there is no playbook for what we're here to do, right? And so having a deep, fortified connection with not just who you are at a soul level, but who you are as a primordial being, and tapping into the remembrance of all of that wisdom that you already have and all of those gifts that you already have to be of high service and to live your truth in this life. is really essential. It's not a nice to have, right? Because as you know, and I know that we will get into this conversation because we're talking about discernment. I mean, wow, everywhere around us, every day, there's just a whole lot of BS, right? Like just untruths, a lot of fear and pretty much media, business, a lot of the people that probably surround you, to those who are listening, take fear-based actions and probably take a kind of reactive approach to things versus responding, which could be another conversation that we could have. But it's really important for you to be fortified in the truth of who you are and not only having that awareness and that knowing, but living that embodied as that through your day-to-day choices. And embodiment isn't a practice, it is a way of being. And is it good to have embodiment practices as an example? Absolutely, because there is value in precision and structure in guiding yourself on that evolutionary journey, but it is in those moment to moment decisions, those moment to moment experiences, that is where embodiment lies. And so discernment is really key around that, right? Because it's really important for all of us to feel really fortified in, you know, what is our truth and how do we discern that? And a lot of what I teach around that, because my work is essentially supporting people in taking what their truth is and turning and alchemizing that, essentially is probably the best word to use, into a lived reality. um I kind of just lost my train of thought there because I was sort of going off on a tangent. But to say that, discernment of that is really key, right? So, and this is what I was gonna say, because what I talk about and teach about a lot in regard to that is not just knowing what your truth is, right? So, what would you fall on the sword for? What are you most passionate about? What are your values and all of that? But how do you feel that truth in your body? And this is not about emotion. This is about tuning into your body and connecting with its sensations, because the body has its own language in how it speaks to us. So that is really how I teach people to cross that threshold. And it really is a threshold, and it's a distinct one.
Discernment can't happen without tuning into the body sensations because that's how we receive our discernment. And so for the sake of our listeners, discernment, right? To discern. What is discernment? To discern what is one's truth, what is not one's truth, to discern what is real, what is not real, to discern what is true from another versus not true. So discernment can come in really practical ways, like with somebody speaking to you, they might say one thing and you might discern an energy underneath it that is different from what they're saying. You might discern, I hear their words, but that's not what I'm actually feeling, right? And what often happens is that if we don't listen to or even connect to know what is being felt energetically, then we can't be in our discernment. But what usually happens is that people will feel something's off, even if they hear something in the news, right, that might not be true, or they hear something politically that might not be true, and the mind might get wrapped up in it, but the body could be saying, I don't know about that. Doesn't quite feel right. What they're telling me, even spiritual leaders or communities, doesn't quite feel right. There's something else here. Who am I going to trust? What often happens, I notice, is that the issue isn't so much feeling and the energy or discernment, it's trusting it. That a lot of people give more authority to what's being said in the news, to what's being said by a leader, to what's being said on social media, or to a partner, to a friend, than they do to their own inner knowing. And
Mhm.
that's where a lot of people get messed up with discernment, is they might be feeling a truth or feeling the energy, but they're not trusting it. They're not honoring it. They're not acknowledging it. And so when it comes to trusting one's own inner knowing or inner voice or inner truth, right? That's quite a journey. And I know that we both support people on that. But if we could talk briefly about, how do you trust your discernment when everyone else, right, might be saying something different or sees it differently?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something to touch on because when it comes to that, I want to speak to discerning with the mind versus discerning with the heart, right? Because you could have a sensation in your body, but if your mind is still functioning as the primary decision maker, then that is going to alter your perception and your ability to trust.
Absolutely.
So it's important to connect with yourself to get really acutely tapped into the sensations of living from the heart versus what a sensation of living from the mind feels like. This is really great that we're talking about this because embodiment is starting to be talked about more and more in streamline platforms, right? But a lot of those teachings, in my very experienced opinion, are still mind based, right? Because embodiment isn't about perfection, it's not performative, right? And it's not to be taught in concept. So, yeah, discerning between the heart and the mind are really important. And I've always advocated for meditation as the number one practice, right? Just learning how to be in stillness, to learn the difference between those sensations in your mind and in your body. That's really the key. And again, we're talking about sensations, we're not talking about emotions, right? So when I am in stillness and I'm discerning something, I sense and see what is happening in my body, in my mind, in my heart. And when I'm in my heart, my mind feels empty. It feels receptive. It doesn't really feel anything. And I feel and see, for me, typically it's like a golden energy that is circulating throughout my heart and traveling up and down my spine. Now, I think everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different, but what is universal is that the mind will be quiet and you'll actually feel the sensations coming from the center of your body, or you might even feel sensations coming from your solar area or your womb, your sacral area, but they won't be coming from the mind. So it's accurate discernment. And when I say that, I'm defining that as discernment that is in coherence with the truth of who you are, isn't coming through the mind.
Right? The mind observes it, right? As you're
Yes.
saying. And I
It's
think when,
observing and it's waiting. Yeah.
yes, yes, because that stillness piece, I say over and over and over, and a lot of people resist this because of the kind of world we live in. You cannot know yourself and your inner self if you do not spend time with yourself. And it has to be in silence and it has to be in stillness. I
Yes.
don't see any way around that. Now, does it have to be hours a day? No.
No.
But to cultivate a state in which you're not listening to other people, you're not listening to all these things, to truly just be with oneself. And I think part of that resistance is because people see meditation as this image, right, of sitting in lotus pose with your
Yeah.
palms up and your fingers in a mantra, and you're doing all these things, and you're almost like you're becoming something else. You're playing a part. And that is not, in my perception or experience of meditating since 2008, meditation. Meditation to me is really me being with me. It's me hearing me. It's me seeing me. It's me spending time with me. It's cultivating a relationship with my inner self. And in order to hear myself, I have to be in silence. As Mary Magdalene said, it's in the silence that we truly hear. Because, like you stated so beautifully, the mind is not the one speaking, the mind is not the one in control. What's happening is then the body, the heart, the soul has space, and we are giving it space
Yes.
to hear it.
Yes. The heart is the multidimensional center of
Mm-hmm.
your being. Your mind, your brain can only discern based upon its past experiences and current present moment in this life.
Exactly. What has been told.
Yes, and that's the thing too, right? The reason why and the struggle feels real, right? Because the societal programming is so deeply embedded. The societal, the ancestral programs are so can be so deeply embedded in us that we have to look externally for the answers, right? That we're taught to look outside of ourselves for the solution. And we're taught that life is supposed to happen in this chronological order. And it's literally all of that is directly the opposite of what the truth is, right? And the truth is that you're a one of a kind being, and especially being that you're here listening to this conversation now, alive in this world during this time, you're being called to something. You're traveling a path that has not yet been paved. And I want to, just elaborate on that briefly to say that that path has been paved in another space and time, but it's not been here during this time, right? And a lot of what we're being called to now in terms of our purpose and our mission work, it isn't something that is new to creation as origin of creation. It's something that we're being called to bring back ancient wisdom, right? There's a lot of talk about New Earth, and New Earth isn't a destination. New Earth is a collective embodiment.
The, it comes through each one of us attuning to our soul's truth. And
Yes.
ascension isn't going anywhere. It's being more and more of who you truly are. And
It's descension.
it's
It's descension.
descension. But it's descension not through, I like to take a quote multidimensional approach, right? We have this embodiment, we have people talking about shadow work and psychology. We have, and I think that they all really can weave together beautifully, but we have to weave them a little more. I know that's what I do with my clients. I'm sure that's what you do with your clients, is we weave these different aspects. We don't ignore them. But with shadow work, for example, and working with the subconscious, we have to bring the light of our soul, of our divine truth, in order to truly transmute the shadow, right? We can't go into the shadow without the awareness of our divinity and actually transmute it. We're still ruled by it, and or we're still identifying with it as something wrong with us, right? For example. And so when it comes to really attuning to the soul truth, which is pulling one's attention back from the external into the internal, which is starting to cultivate this inner relationship, this capacity to connect to listen to those sensations, this capacity to also question what is coming in the mind, right? That's another aspect, because we have the mind, we have the emotions, we have the body, we have the sensations, we have the soul. And a lot of it is aligning and integrating them. But mind control is real. And so it doesn't mean we ignore the mind. It's a fabulous tool. It's just that that's not necessarily where your soul truth is going to come from. It's that your mind is then becoming aware of and observing. And it in this conversation, it's important to take a little time out to say ego and mind are not the same thing, just for the listener's sake. Ego and mind are two different things. When we're talking about our mind, it's our consciousness and our capacity to observe is different than our ego mind. So we could dive into that a little bit more if you want to, but for the sake of what I'm saying in this moment, that when we have this consciousness, this capacity to observe the body, the heart, the sensations, the emotions, what's coming up, we also then have the capacity to align our thoughts and our beliefs to our soul's truth, for example. And when we are inundated with various beliefs and thoughts and what I would say programming, it is very important to have the stillness to notice what's not only sensations in the body, but what are these thoughts in my mind? Are they mine? Were they implanted here? Is that something I just heard that's now circulating? Is this mine? And really be conscious about recognizing they might not be yours. They could have been implanted there. They could be from a movie you just watched. They could be from news you just tuned into. They could be from something somebody else said. It doesn't mean that's your soul's truth. It doesn't mean it's yours at all. And everything that we witness and observe, whether it be an emotion, a feeling, a thought, a belief, we have the capacity to transform it and transmute it and align it to what is our truth. But then people sometimes get stuck with knowing, well, what is my truth then? How do I know that truth? How do I know what is my truth versus somebody else's truth? How do I know what is my truth versus the past self I've always known? So I'd love for us to dive into that as well.
Yeah, I want to start off by saying there's a couple of ways that are very simple and easy, actually, that are helpful in with what we're talking about here. And one is when you're feeling that confusion or that overwhelm of various options and thoughts and whatever it is, understanding first that there's a difference between doing and expressing when you're making a decision, okay? Doing is performative, can feel performative, right? Expressing comes from within. So when you're making a decision on something like, let's say, who are most of the people that are probably listening to your podcast right now? Are they entrepreneurs? Are they self-employed? Are they
Variety. Yeah, a lot of people that work full time, plus some people that are also self-employed
yeah.
entrepreneurs.
So there's a very, so we can speak to both here. We can speak to people that are employed, we can speak to leaders, we can speak to entrepreneurs, right? People who are paving their own path, to use this as an example. Okay. Let's say that you're faced with a decision about whether or not something is the right thing for you to offer another person. Okay. Uh, there's a lot of noise in the business world, and I say that because, the landscape is rapidly changing, right? But there's a lot of noise in the world when it comes to whether it's businesses, entrepreneurs, companies saying that this is the right way to connect with clients, or this is the right way to be visible, right? And what happens with a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs and people who are employed maybe in management or leadership positions, right? They think to themselves, wow, I'm faced with this decision and what's the best decision? And a lot of times end up, and for some reason, this percentage of 84% of the time is coming forward. So I'm going to say that number, right? But to say let's say 84% of the time, that's intuitive, not based off of statistics, just so everyone listening knows. They default to what the established structure is, right? What's the most that they hear noise about? And it may have nothing to do, and most of the time it has nothing to do with what they feel, whether or not is true. It's just that's an established structure. And so that's the decision that they make. That would be an example of doing something, right? Versus stepping back. An example of expression would be being faced with the same decision, okay, and stepping back, whether it's in 10 minutes of meditation or however someone approaches their time for stillness, right? To do some inner reflection, feeling into their body. This is the decision, tuning into their oversoul and asking the question and trusting what comes forward and then making the decision based upon that action. And a lot of the reason why we can feel stuck on our journey as individuals and why you see all around us in the world that we're stuck, right? Is because we keep making the same decisions based upon established paradigms that aren't even relevant anymore to the times that we're living in.
Me too. Why a lot of people don't trust their discernment is because they're afraid of that, because they're afraid of going out of the normal quote paradigm, because they're afraid of it's the unknown, because they're afraid, can I trust myself that much? Because it doesn't feel as safe, because other people might not like it, other people
Yep.
might not agree. And so I've heard several people that are aware of their own inner truth be afraid to claim it, to trust their discernment when it's not what other people think, right? Because they're not trusting their inner knowing above the external. And and that's often why I think people stick to what's known, because these fears arise, and then that's then the inner work. But to have the awareness first of, oh, I need to do this inner work. I need to look at these fears. I need to work on trusting myself. For me, having been an oracle in past lives, having doing the kind of work that I do, I am a visionary and I bring forth the unseen, and I work with energy and I help my clients work with energy, right? And I'm constantly in the unseen realm. I'm constantly in both worlds. And a lot of my healing has had to be trusting what only I can see, even when no one else sees it, right? Really trusting that. And that's part of our discernment. It's trusting what only you can see. It's trusting what you cannot verify through the other person's words or
Yes.
actions. You
And
have to
yes,
trust.
and understanding, and you brought up fear, right? So I initially brought up performance versus expression coming from a place of right, tuning into that knowing. And fear is the next one. That is a really easy way to tell that there's a misalignment, is if you feel fear. It means there's a misalignment somewhere. And willingness to cultivate a deep curiosity and humility with yourself is so important, because when you have something like that come up, a fear, whatever it is, immediately going within in a neutral state of being, of course. So if you're feeling scared or your nervous system is on overload, you don't want to try to ascertain, get those answers for yourself right then. You want to wait until you're in a neutral state of being. But whenever that time is right for you, you need to be able to have the willingness to go in and go, okay, well, I made this decision today and this fear came up. Well, what is the truth? Tuning into your oversoul, what is the truth of where that fear is coming from? And then following those divine breadcrumbs, right? Until you get to the root cause of whatever it is, and then clearing it, right? It's even in there's so much value in multidimensional healing work, energy work, the Akashic records. There's just like so many different ways um to go in, but making sure that you're going in at the depth that you need to, right? Because in a lot of spiritual communities and the personal development industry as a whole, it's still very performative and very surface level, right? So tune in to this activation, which is going to get you to 5-figure months, or it's going to, you're going to find the love of your life, you know. That stuff can work to a certain extent, but the missing piece is really, what do you do after that? Right? You
Still
know?
not necessarily a level of embodiment, nor is that necessarily someone's soul journey or soul truth. Again, I think the question is the focus on external reward, external performance, what other
Yeah.
people were think, right? Fear-based, need-based, or is the focus on I'm aligning to my truth, I'm trusting, I'm connecting and developing inner union, divine union with myself. I am
Yes.
in my sovereignty. I am in my pleasure, in my knowing. I'm in my natural inherent state of abundance, no matter what is happening around me. Whether I get that 5K, whether I make $5, that I know my inherent worth, that I can still be in a state of pleasure and connection with all of life, because what travels with you is your consciousness. What travels with you is the consciousness of your eternal soul. And that can shift lifetimes when you make that shift in this lifetime. But where's the focus? And that requires a lot of courage. It's not a coincidence that courage means liqueur, right? The heart. It requires a lot of courage to do that level of work. And but again, it also requires discernment, because what those messages are doing, and I think most people are inundated. That's most of what all I see. It's one of the reasons I don't like to be on a lot of platforms, because you have to also use your discernment. Is this fear-based? Is this saying to me, if you don't do this thing, you won't XYZ? Is
Right?
it need-based? And usually it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything fear-based will never come from your highest self. It
No.
never will. Because fear isn't part of the equation, right? It's love, it's truth. A lot of times that primordial part of you is going to feel neutral, and it might feel loving. And even at times, that inner guidance could trigger you to feel scared or to feel fear, but it would only be because it could be giving you guidance to do something that is fueled towards your expansion. Because that is who we are as creator beings. We're here to constantly evolve and to expand. And a lot of what is around us again in society is follow this direction, follow these rules, be this kind of person. You can only be successful if you do this, this, and this. And that is a direct inversion of who we naturally are.
Before we start to wrap up the conversation, I want us to touch base on, with so much in the world that is intentionally feeding fear, just helping our listeners navigate their own response to fear-based messaging, whether it be on social media, whether it be in an offer, whether it be in the news and in the world. There are things happening physically in the world that create fear in people, or concern of the future, worry about what will happen. And I know I have a lot to say about that, but I want to hear from you as to what arises when I ask that question that would be most helpful for people as we navigate, I would say, these times. By that, I don't mean it in a foreboding way, but as we navigate the external chaos, seeming chaos, right? I don't live in chaos. I don't feel that chaos, but I hear a lot of people that are struggling with where to put their attention, and how to do it, and how to be embodied spiritually without ignoring what's happening, right? And some people don't want to give up listening or tuning to certain things, and how to really, I think it's important that we address this when we talk about discernment, how to discern and how to be in that on a real practical level.
Yeah. Some listening may or may not like the answer I'm going to give, and the answer to sustainably navigating all of that in a grounded way is to be very connected and fortified in the truth of who you are. Whenever you find yourself feeling confused or getting wrapped up in what's going on in the external world, and there is, in fact, a lot going on, right? But when you find yourself in a space like that, it's because you're not grounded in yourself.
Agree, 100%.
That's the answer. That's the answer. It is that simple. And it doesn't mean, because this is another inversion, okay, is that if we put ourselves first, put our own mask on first, right? The only place they really tell you to do that is airplanes, I guess, that I can think of. But we're taught to look outside of ourselves, to care for people outside of ourselves again. And that's an inversion, right? Where it's the opposite of that. It's when you're very fortified and have a clear, grounded sense of who you are and your truth and what that is for you, and you're living that in your day-to-day choices and decisions and your mission work or your job or whatever it is, then none of that affects you anymore. You don't get overwhelmed with what's going on in the world anymore. And it doesn't mean that you don't care. And that's really important, because we've also been taught that in order to demonstrate that we care, we need to react in some way. And that's not true either. I refer to it as detached compassion. So you can feel very neutral in your body and feel very grounded in your body and still care very much about what is happening in the world. But the difference is that through ensuring that you're grounded in whatever your truth is and that you're living it, right? That you're here doing the mission work you're meant to do, that you're here working at the job that you're meant to work at, whatever feels true for you, doing that and living embodied as that is the greatest way that you can make a difference in our world.
Which really what you're describing is sovereignty is a living from the inside out.
Yes.
Sovereignty is radiating, it's connecting to knowing, which is its own process and journey, the
Yes.
truth of who you are, and radiating that out into the world rather than taking the world in and making it yours. And that's a very different way of living than we've been taught. But the first step is, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, really knowing and spending time to know that self. And with that comes this inquiry into, is that mine? Is that not mine? Is that my truth? Is that not my truth? Is this fear-based? Is this love-based? Is this need-based? Is this desire-based? And it's a constant inquiry. I know we've both been on this path for 15 years or more, and it doesn't stop. It's not like one day you become sovereign and you can just numb out and never be aware anymore. It's a constant attunement on just deeper and deeper levels to the truth of who you are and a greater and greater capacity. But you don't just suddenly become something else and stop living in the world. But your entire experience of the world shifts. The way in which you show up in the world shifts, right?
Yes.
That's what shifts.
Yes. And that is the journey. That's what it means to live embodied in your divinity. That's what
Exactly.
it means. A lot of people focus on ascension. And yes, there is a time in your journey where you're remembering, where you're ascending, but it's concurrently a journey of descension, right? Because it's awareness and embodiment. And it's, just like if you're imagining an infinity symbol, right? Like a constant stream of consciousness circulating. That's what our existence is. right? But a lot of people are either living, you know, in one end of the spectrum or or too much in the other, right? And I'm feeling guided to say that if you're someone listening who you're feeling like, well, I feel like I'm struggling to even get to the place where I can meditate consistently or um create that space for stillness for myself. Ask yourself why that is, because there can be deeper reasons because for why we're resisting creating that space for ourselves, right? And it could be something that's trauma based, which it is in a lot of cases. We can have fears of facing ourselves, right? We can feel like be in a space where we feel like facing ourselves is scarier than anything else externally, right? That's happening in the world. So if you're listening and you're feeling in that place, that it may be beneficial for you to speak with someone, to reach out for support. I've always believed that great mentors, great people who can hold space for others often can see the vision of you, can see you before you can see the whole of yourself. And sometimes all that is needed is for you to step into a space where you can feel held and seen in that way, so that you feel safe to come forward.
Here, the meditation or the resistance to sitting in stillness with oneself is not wanting to hear one's thoughts. And I often will say, okay, so then write them down. Get familiar with them, because the more you don't want to hear them, the more they're controlling you unconsciously, or people don't want to feel what's coming up. And again, that's creating an emotional awareness. And sometimes it's necessary to do this with a guide. Sometimes you can do this on your own. That depends on your level of capacity and desire. Sometimes you just want support. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. But when there's a inability to sit with oneself and you have the desire to do so, that means there are things you don't want to see. That means that there are things you're afraid to hear or feel. That often means there's a resistance to something or fear of something. And the only way out is through. We have to look at these pieces and parts. And sometimes it's with a helping hand. Sometimes that's on your own, that strong consciousness and ability to hold yourself if you've developed that. But it is possible, and the only way out is through. The only way out is through. um,
Yeah,
so
and all that you need to have, right, for that is a spark of willingness, a
devotion.
spark of, yeah, knowing in your heart that there's more.
Nobody ever said change was easy.
No, no, it's not easy, but it is good and it is part of the experience of who we are, right? We're taught that change is a bad thing, especially I'm not sure what generation you are, but I'm gonna date myself to say that I'm Gen X, right? And so a lot of women my age, give or take 10 years, right, have been taught to believe that, oh, if you go to college and get a career and stay doing the same thing for 30 years, right? That lack of change is the path. And it may be a perceived safe path, but is it the happy path? And is it the aligned path? It might not be. So yeah, we're wired for change.
You want the world around you to change, then it does begin with you changing. It does.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm. Jennifer, it's been such a pleasure. I know you have the Path of the Awakened Heart podcast, and I'm going to be a guest on your podcast soon as well. And I
Yes.
want people to know about that. We'll put links below in the show notes. But if you want to wrap up with any final words and also where people can find you.
Yeah. The best place to find me is my website, jenniferspor.com. So for those listening audibly, that's JENNIFERSPOR.com. So my podcast is there, um, different services and ways to work with me and more information about me. And I've also interviewed on a lot of other podcasts and summits, and all of that information is on my website. So that's the best place to go to connect with me. And in closing, the one last thing I want to just say is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Whatever you're being called to, just take a little step forward every day, right? Toward whatever that is. And I also want to say that it's important to understand that you're not becoming. What's happening is we call it becoming, and I've called it that too. But what this is you're in a journey of stepping into who you already are, right? So being present to that and giving yourself permission to honor that no matter what that looks like is so important.
But great to have you here. I'll put all the links below so people can learn more about you. And if you like this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, share it with anybody else who can benefit from hearing these words of wisdom. And I will see you next week on the Soul Sovereignty podcast.